didn't just say, okay, well, that's time for this event to happen. We can sit back and wait and see what happens. Daniel prayed. And in this prayer, which I'm not going to look at in detail, but this prayer itself is one of the great prayers of the Bible. Daniel prayed for the fulfillment of this prophecy, and he prayed along the lines of the Torah in the book of Leviticus, chapter 26, the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, confessing the sins of his people and asking God for mercy. Just to mention Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, these two chapters really are key chapters in the Hebrew Scriptures for understanding the history of the people of Israel. In the book of Leviticus chapter 26, there are actually 5 cycles of discipline which will come upon Israel if they disobey the Lord. Each one more serious in its extent, and the last and most serious cycle of discipline is that Israel, the people, will be removed from the land and sent into exile. We read this in Leviticus 26, verse 32, where it says, if you continue to disobey the Lord, I will bring the land to desolation. Your enemies who dwell in it shall be astonished at it. I will scatter you among the nations and draw out a sword after you. Your land shall be desolate and your cities waste. So that is the result of disobedience to the Lord. And in Leviticus chapter 26, verse 40, it says, but if they confess their iniquity, the iniquity of their fathers, with the unfaithfulness in which they were unfaithful to me, that they have walked contrary to me, that I have also walked contrary to them, and have brought them into the land of their enemies, if their uncircumcised hearts are humbled and they accept their guilt, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob, my covenant with Isaac, my covenant with Abraham, I will remember the land. And Daniel is actually praying along these lines. He's praying along the lines of God's covenant, confessing the sin of his people, agreeing with God, as it were, that God was justified in bringing this judgment upon his people, and yet pleading with God on the basis of God's mercy to fulfill his word and to bring his people back to the land as he had promised. So he asked God for mercy, and as we look into this chapter in Daniel chapter 9, you can see that Daniel asked God to forgive, to restore Jerusalem, to restore your sanctuary, which is desolate, i.e. the temple, and to do this for the sake of your city, your people who are called by your name. So Daniel prays that God will have mercy upon his people because of his name, because of his city, because of his people. And because God, again, as we've seen, is a covenant-keeping God, he can pray this in faith. And God's response to Daniel was to send the angel Gabriel with the 70 weeks of years prophecy, which is the main thing we want to look at tonight. Could spend the whole time looking actually at Daniel's prayer because it's a wonderful subject, but that's just the brief background to that prayer. And God is answering this prayer and showing Daniel that, as he says at the end of his prayer, O Lord, hear, O Lord, forgive, O Lord, listen and act. Do not delay. For your own sake, my God, for your city, your people are called by your name. So let's look at the content of this 70 weeks of years prophecy. The subject of the prophecy is your people, i.e. the Jewish people, and your holy city, i.e. Jerusalem. And by the completion of this prophecy, 6 things are going to happen, all of which we find in verse 26. By the time the 70 weeks are determined or fulfilled, and I'll say in a moment what that actually means, but at the end of that time, he says there'll be finished transgression, make an end of sins, make reconciliation for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up vision and prophecy, and anoint the most holy. In fact, anoint the most holy, the Hebrew for that is limshoch kadosh kadoshim. I once had a discussion with this with an Orthodox Jewish man, and he said that your translation there is wrong. It should mean actually to anoint the Holy of Holies. And I said, that's much better. Thank you for that. And in fact, the Hebrew limshoch actually means to Messiah, literally, to bring the Messiah to the Holy of Holies. And so what this prophecy is saying, that by the end of this period of the 70 weeks of years, all of those things will come to pass. The man said to say, well, all of these things have not come to pass now, therefore Jesus is not the Messiah. Hopefully we can actually come to understand that, because all of these things will come to pass at the end of the 70th week, and the end of the 70th week, I believe, is the second coming of Yeshua HaMashiach, when all of this will be completely fulfilled. But we have this fulfilled at the end of the 70th week. As we shall see, this prophecy is divided into periods of 3 sections of different times which are referred to as a week. So to understand this, first of all, you have to say, what does the prophecy mean by a week?